Well, Monday marked the Senate's return to Capitol Hill. Confirmations are a priority in the first 2 days so far. And a key one is underway right now. So Nancy Cordes has been following the latest on Capitol Hill, and she's joining us now. Nancy, how's the Senate working with all of these restrictions in place, social distancing and masks and all of that?
Well, Anne-Marie, we're getting our first real look at it this morning as this hearing is underway for the confirmation of John Ratcliffe, congressman from Texas, to be the next director of national intelligence. I was sitting in that hearing room for a couple of hours, and it's such a bizarre feeling. They have moved the Intelligence Committee to one of the largest hearing rooms on the Senate side, and yet there are only about 20 people in there, only a handful of senators at a time. That's by design, to keep as few people from infecting one another potentially as possible. Ratcliffe himself sitting at a long desk all by himself. He's got wipes and hand sanitizer at his disposal. And then normally in a hearing of this import, you'd have dozens of reporters in there furiously taking notes. In this case, only 3 or 4 of us were allowed in, and they were trying to keep us from leaving, if at all possible, because they are trying to cut down on the amount of back and forth in the hearing room. So it certainly was an unusual scene, almost everyone wearing masks, and clearly a sign of things to come, at least for the next few weeks here on Capitol Hill, as the Senate tries to figure out how to get its work done and yet keep senators safe, keep staffers safe, keep all the support staff here on Capitol Hill safe in such an uncertain time.
Nancy, remind our viewers how Congressman Ratcliffe came to be in this position. He was put up to be the nation's top intelligence chief last year, and the president withdrew that nomination. Explain why and how he ended up back in front of these members of Congress.
Yeah, it's been a rocky road for him. Essentially, you had Republicans here in the Senate kind of give him the cold shoulder when the president floated his name initially. They felt that he didn't have the requisite experience for the job. I mean, this is essentially the nation's top intelligence official, someone who needs the experience and the independence and the gravitas to be able to speak truth to the president of the United States, someone who notoriously rejects a lot of intelligence that comes across his desk if he doesn't like it. And frankly, Republicans and Democrats alike were concerned that Ratcliffe, who has only been in the House for a few years, who had only been sitting on the House Intelligence Committee at the point that the president first raised him for a couple of months, they just didn't feel that he was the right person for the job. And so the president a few days later changed his mind. But in the intervening months, no one else came to the forefront. He nominated someone to be the acting director of national intelligence, Richard Grenell, who had been the ambassador to Germany, who lawmakers liked even less and didn't want to see in that role any longer than possible. And so the president's initial choice of Ratcliffe kind of came back around, and on a Friday night a couple of months ago, he announced that he would in fact be nominating Ratcliffe for the job. And the hope, many lawmakers tell me, on the part of the administration was that these senators would be so eager to see Grenell move on that they'd now be willing to give Ratcliffe a second look. And apparently that's what's happening, because so far he has gotten a relatively warm reception from the Republican senators in this confirmation hearing. And even Susan Collins, who was a real wild card, she's the Republican from Maine who actually authored the legislation that created the position of Director of National Intelligence in the first place. Even she put out a sort of a lukewarm statement that said that she does now believe that Ratcliffe has the minimal experience to do the job, sort of damning with faint praise, but at the very least she's signaling that she might be willing to vote in favor of his nomination. And he's certainly saying all the right things in this confirmation hearing. He's saying that he'd be independent from the president, that he'd be willing to give the president information that he doesn't want to hear, that he wants to work with the intelligence community's inspector general, which is no small thing, because we know that the inspector general was recently removed at the president's initiative, and that was viewed as a political move by the president after the actions of the IG ended up leading to impeachment hearings here in the Senate.
Yeah, in fact, that's another confirmation hearing that's being heard now, right? The person that he's put up for the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. So we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars being spent, and this is the person that will have to ensure that the money goes to the right places. What do we know about him? Is it Brian Miller? I think that's the name, and is he likely to be confirmed?
Right. So he's a presidential pick, and it comes at a time when both Democrats and some Republicans are somewhat uneasy with the moves that the president has made regarding several inspectors general. They feel that he's trying to stack the deck. And keep in mind, these are the watchdogs in the federal government. Their job is not to make the president happy. Their job is to root out abuse and waste and fraud and shine a light on it. And so inherently, any inspector general, if they're doing their job, is going to make the executive branch a little uncomfortable. That is the nature of the role. But what Democrats say is that the president here is retaliating against people who are simply doing their job. So Miller certainly will get grilled. As you point out, it is a huge amount of money, the likes of which this government has never doled out before. And the good news is that Miller is one of many, many inspector generals. Certainly he'll have a leading role, but inspector generals across the government in every agency are going to be looking at how this money gets spent. There are committees here on Capitol Hill that are being established as well, because it is far too much for one agency alone to get its hands around, get its head around. This money is going so many places. These laws came together so quickly that there were inevitably going to be loopholes, ways to get around oversight. And so it's fair to say that that Miller, who's going to be undergoing his confirmation hearing this afternoon, if he's confirmed, he is certainly going to have his work cut out for him.
Nancy, let me ask you about Senator Mitt Romney, who's proposing a hazard pay plan to boost hourly wages for essential workers during the pandemic. He's the first Senate Republican to formally introduce a plan like this, following a version from Democrats last month. Any traction there in the Senate?
It's a little too soon to say which of these ideas are going to get traction, because senators are just coming back and Republican leaders have tried to kind of pump the brakes on the next big spending bill. So everyone's kind of just looking at the ideas that are out there at this point. It's certainly notable that a Republican is proposing a plan like that, but it's not the first time. Josh Hawley, who's a Republican, very conservative from Missouri, introduced a plan a few weeks ago that would establish a minimum income for working Americans, something that in typical times would not be a big GOP proposal, but these are not normal times. And so I think we're going to see more proposals along those lines from both Democrats and Republicans. The question is, will it be the Senate that is taking the lead on crafting this next big spending package, which will probably include money for state and local governments, perhaps more money for testing, perhaps another round of payments, another $1,200 to Americans, who knows? But will it be the Senate that takes the lead, or will it be the House? The House, Democrats there definitely want to be the body that pushes this through. They want all of their priorities to be in that bill, but it's the Senate that is here right now and working while the House stays away.
All right, Nancy Cordes for us on Capitol Hill. Nancy, we thank you.
You're welcome.